the questions. These third sections, André Afonso, se calhar podíamos subir, and Emily, and Natasha and Federica on Zoom. And we wait for the questions. Chantal. Dúvidas, questions?
I have a question for Emily, if I may ask. Emily, I thought your paper was really fascinating, and I just wanted to hear a little bit more about this notion that you mentioned a couple of times about haunting. You mentioned sort of that this technique was kind of haunting the images, haunting the production of sculptors, including his own father, who had obviously just died before he painted that work that you showed. So I just wondered if you could speak a little bit more about that, which I thought was a very interesting thread work.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
No, thank you for that question. I think that I meant haunting primarily in terms of his like paternal ancestry, and the fact that his uncle and his father were both very famous sculptors of their time. So he entered the Beaux-Arts education with this last name, where people already associated him with sculpture, but he kind of transgressed from that path and decided to become a painter instead, but then returned to this paternal sculptural heritage by painting his uncle's and father's studios. So the idea that like he was trying to remove himself from that path, but then couldn't help but be drawn back to it, like as if the medium was haunting him and his practice in that way. So that is primarily what I meant by haunting. But I do think that in terms of plaster casting and mold making itself, I think that there's a lot to be said about like absence and negative space and haunting a form. But I haven't explored that fully in depth yet.
That's all?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. Thank you, Natasha, for the question. More questions?
I think my question is for any of this session. I was curious about, as we increasingly get into sort of humanity and interest in painting forms and other sorts of things like that, I'm particularly interested, was there ever any discussion or rhetorics or theories about plaster and color? Its inability to take color or its ability to be painted, and how that might affect its sort of issues with naturalism, hypernaturalism, or antinaturalism that sort of come up in this session.
So it's someone has a subject.
Could you repeat your question, please?
Sure. I'm particularly interested in the plaster and color as we get sort of more into the late 19th, early 20th century, where I think color becomes such an interesting feature and important thing for the arts in general. And I'm wondering if plasters ever engage in those conversations.
For all the final, yeah. But
I don't have nothing to say about
not on the show.
No. They were just fascinated of the the plaster, it was not just white, but they, the formatori patinated the plastic casts to be more, how can I say, more similar to the original object. So I don't know.
Okay. Microfone. Make your question, please. Okay.
Yes, I wanted to ask Andre, very good to meet you finally. Thank you very much for your paper, and thank you everybody for a series of wonderful papers. Andre, I was just wondering when in 1951 the School of Fine Art accepted this collection of plaster casts. Was it in any way, is there any obvious reason why it would be interested in objects like that? It seems to be a very awkward point in the development of art to donation. Is there any obvious interests that you could, from looking at the work in the school at that point, that you could deduce in relation to an armory collection?
Thank you, Eckhart, for your question. Nice to meet you. So, what I've read in the documentation of this process, it was basically the museum want to free its storage. So the museum started to talk with some institutions that could be interested in incorporating the plastic cast. So the museum talked with the school and talked with the Portuguese government that was in charge in the creation of the Museum of Comparative Sculpture. So if the plastic cast went to the school in 51, in 44, a lot of plastic cast went also to the Museum of Comparative Sculpture. So I don't know exactly why the school accepted this plaster cast, but in the same set of the plaster casts that were produced in Armory, there was also a sculpture that was a reproduction of a canova, a reproduction of a lion whose original was also made by canova. Was lots of reproductions of ornamental elements. So I think there was an interesting in the school to enrich its plaster cast collection to be used as pedagogical or education tools in the drawing classes, in the sculptural classes. So it was, I'm not sure about it, but it looked like obvious that it was very interesting for the school to have 100 new plaster casts in its collection to be used as teaching tools. So I think it was more or less like this.
Thank you. Yeah, no, that would explain. Yeah.
We have times. Let's finish now the questions for me. Alice, continue for the next I'm chairman. I'm going to finish my chairman, my chairman job. Thank you and see you, Alice.